Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf Chet. This month's learning is dedicated to the refuah shlema of our dear friend Phyllis Hecht, Gittel Pesha Bat Masha Rachel, by her many friends who love and admire her. Phyllis, you're a remarkable person who lives and embodies Torah. Your towering emunah, strength, and positivity are an inspiration. It is truly incredible how you uplift everyone around you with great Torah learning with continued kindness. Phyllis, may Kadosh Baruch Hu shower you with health, strength, and abundance of blessings. Today's daf is sponsored by Stacy Goodstein Ashtemker and family in honor of her daughter Eden completing the IDF officers course. As she becomes a Katsinat Nifgaim serving wounded IDF soldiers and bereaved families, we pray that Hashem will give her the strength and guidance for the challenging job ahead. Okay, we're going to get started. Chodesh Tov to everyone. We're going to have one of these dapim that if you want to try to track the flow of the daf, it's a little bit complicated because we're going to keep going back to previous things that were mentioned and then going in depth about it. There's going to be a bunch of gufas, which that's exactly what gufa does. It says, oh, we mentioned this before, but we weren't really talking about that element of it. Let's talk about that element of it. So we're going to start with something that we mentioned in the middle of Zayin Amud Bet. So in the middle, mamash, if you look smack in the middle of the daf, there's this statement of Rabbi Zreika in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. Af bedam lo kidesh. If you remember the context, what were we saying? If you didn't put the amount, again, in slaughtering an animal, they slaughter an animal, and the Kohen collects the blood. Now, if there wasn't enough blood in the first cup, and they basically split the blood that you needed to put on the altar into 2 cups, and again, this means you could split it into 2 cups, but you have to have enough in the first cup, or one of the cups, to actually put the blood on the altar. And if you don't have enough blood to put on the altar, then it's not sanctified. If it's not sanctified, it can't be used. Okay, so if you put in the vessel not enough of a requisite amount for what you need, it's not sanctified according to Rabbi Eliezer. Now, the Gemara at the very bottom of the daf questions Rabbi Eliezer's statement here in light of a different statement that Rabbi Eliezer makes. So again, we got off that topic and we went into understanding, right? One of the drashot, there were 3 drashot on that pasuk, v'taval, bedam, minadam. And then we got off on the minadam and the shirayim, but now we're going back to this topic. So Miyamar Rabbi Eliezer Hachi, did he really say this? I'm 2 lines from the bottom of Zayin Amud Bet. V'ha itmar, it was said about a different thing, not about a korban, not about the sacrifice, the animal sacrifice, but about a mincha offering. Now, you might recall, we've talked about this in the past, the Kohen Gadol has to bring a griddle-cake mincha offering twice a day. Okay, he has to bring it once in the morning, once in the afternoon. However, he brings everything first in the morning, okay? And in fact, it says in the pasuk, I'll read it, we'll look at this pasuk later, Vayikra chapter 6, verse 13. Zeh korban Aaron ubanav, this is the korban of Aaron and his sons, asher yakrivu laHashem biyomi mashechoto. Asirit haifa, right? This is actually this is the minchat chinuch, I think. But anyway, asirit haifa sol the minchat tamid, machatzita b'boker, machatzita b'erev. Right, this is his minchat chavitin. I'm not sure why it says the day he's timashechoto. But anyway, it says there he brings half in the morning and half in the evening. And what they darshan from this pasuk is machatzita means half of it. There's a dot in the hay. Okay, we're going to get to this drasha later, which sounds like it has to be whole in the beginning. But Rabbi Eliezer says, despite the fact that you would think it has to be whole, so we're going to have this machloka between him and Rabbi Yochanan. What happens if you only put half of it, though, in the kli sharet? Is it sanctified or not? So knowing Rabbi Eliezer and what he says about blood, what would you expect? If you don't put enough of the requisite amount of the blood in the bowl, then it's not going to be sanctified. So you would think he would say the same thing here, that even though you're going to split it up in the morning and put half in the morning, half in the afternoon, he's going to say you have to put the whole thing, but that's not what he says. In fact, Rabbi Yochanan says that. Chavitei Kohen Gadol, Rabbi Yochanan omer, eina kedosha lechatzain. It's not sanctified if you put half in one bowl and half in the other from the beginning. Rabbi Eliezer amar, mitoch shekreva lechatzain, kedosha lechatzain. He says, this one, well, look, in the end, you're going to basically divide in half anyway. So you could divide in half from the beginning and just put half the dough. Okay, we're going to see, what does he do with the machatzita as if it was, we're going to see, he says, well, you bring the whole thing in the morning, but when you put it in the bowl, in the temple, you can split it in 2, you can put half there, even though you don't put the whole amount in the bowl at once. Vim ita, now if he really holds it by the blood, it's the case, then leilaf midam. They make this certain assumption, which they're going to question in a minute, but why don't we just say that he would learn it from blood? And I think what's bothering them also is there are two opinions here, right? So wouldn't you expect he'd be on the other side of this machloket? Maybe if nobody thought that it had to all go in one bowl, maybe we wouldn't have thought this. But being that Rabbi Yochanan says you have to put it all in at once, and he says it by the blood, wouldn't you think he would say the same thing by the mincha? Now the Gemara says, who's to say you learn blood from mincha? V'chi tema Rabbi Eliezer, milta mi milta lo gamar. We're going to see this phrase 3 times today. Okay, you might have thought that maybe he doesn't learn one thing from another. This has its rules, that has its rules, and we don't really learn one thing from another. But now we're going to see that's not true. V'chi tema is always, if you're going to say, we're going to show you not. V'ha'amar Rabbi Eliezer. Now, they're going to take an example, something else, and it's very different. But they're going to say, from here, you see, we derive one halacha from a different halacha. And therefore, you would think, and back to this question, you would think he would derive the minchat chavitin, the griddle-cake, mincha offering of the Kohen from the blood of the animal. And he doesn't, and then we're stuck with the question. But right now, we're going into something else, which is, where do we see that he learns one thing from another? Mincha shekmatza, okay, Hamar Rabbi Eliezer, he himself says, mincha shekmatza behechal kshera. If you do the kmitza of the mincha, meaning you take the komets out, okay? If you do it in the heichal, which is the inner sanctuary, which is more sacred, it's fine. Okay, you're not really supposed to do it there. If you remember, let's talk about the mincha process again. We'll keep going through it so you get it in your head. You bring from your house, your solid and all that, you put it in a sanctified bowl in the temple. From there, the offering, okay, and then they mix it, right? You put the flour, you put, if it's oil, we're going to talk about all different kinds that have oil in it, the frankincense and all that. You put the oil in, you put the frankincense on top, then you bring it to the altar. Okay, there's this halacha of hagasha. You have to bring the whole meal offering toward the mizbeach. Then the Kohen takes a kmitza. Okay, presumably he does it there. Today we're going to talk about where can the Kohen do the kmitza. Okay, you might remember, kamatz misham, actually we said you do it right at the entrance, where the zar is. So we're going to talk about that. That would mean basically you have to bring it to the altar and then you bring it back. Okay, but we're going to say that doesn't really mean that. And then you take the kmitza. Remember, so first of all, you move the frankincense to the side. The Kohen puts his 3 middle fingers in, takes out a kometz with his right hand. I always show it with my left because I'm lefty, but does it with his right hand. And then takes it, puts it in a new sanctified vessel. You use 2 sanctified vessels there, and then burns it on the altar. So now it says, what if he went into the heichal to do the kmitza? So they say it's fine. Why? We're going to learn milta mi milta, davar mi davar. We're going to learn one thing from another. The bizichei levona, the lechem apanim, right? There's the 12 loaves. There's 2 bowls of frankincense. At the end of each week, the kohanim take the frankincense off, the bowls of frankincense off. They take the loaves off. They burn the frankincense. That permits the loaves. And what do you see here? The siluk bezichin. Now we're going to compare taking out a kometz, right? Taking out the handful from the meal offering to taking the bezichim off the table. It's different, but it's similar. So now, if the siluk bezichin can happen in the sanctuary, in the heichal, then also the mincha can be kometzed in the sanctuary. And that's davar mi davar. To which the Gemara says, wait, you're comparing that, learning the kometz from the bezichin, the bezichei levona, the frankincense bowls, you're learning that from that, and you want to then say, we could also learn the mincha offering from the blood of the animal? What do you mean? Mincha mi mincha yalif, mincha mi dam lo yalif. The showbread and the bezichei levona, that's all called also a meal offering. Now, you don't usually view it as a meal offering, but it's a type of meal offering because it's, again, the same type of thing. Flour, water, all that, and the oil. Actually, that doesn't have oil, but it's similar. And that's in the same world. So that's why he learns that from that. But, and here's a very simple answer to the question, we're not going to learn a meal offering from blood. The blood has to all be collected in one place. But it doesn't mean, right, the requisite amount has to be in one bowl. Doesn't mean the mincha chavitin has to be that, but that's totally different than blood. Okay? That's the answer. But now, because we already brought this up, they're going to question even what he said earlier. Okay, can you really learn mincha from mincha? Like, how does he do that? Okay, and we're going to question this. from a different source, okay? I just want to remind you of this because later, much, much later in the daf, okay, I told you this daf is, maybe you could call it a little dizzying. I'm trying to think of the word for it, but we keep getting off on tangent, on tangent, on tangent. Toward the very end of the daf, we're going to come back to this and ask another question on this one line about this side point that we brought up for Rabbi Eliezer. How could he learn milta from milta? Oh, yeah, he does because, right, or maybe he doesn't learn milta from milta. Oh, he does because of this case of the mincha-style, like the siluk b'zichin. So here's one question on it, and then later we're going to have another question. So now they're going to ask, you can see how far off we're going to get. Mincha mi yalef, do we really learn mincha from mincha? We're going to show you another case where he doesn't learn mincha from mincha. V'hatanya. Okay, now, for those who are going to the bread making workshop, so you're going to learn this, which is the lechem apanim was very fragile. I don't know if you've seen the shape of the lechem apanim, but it's basically like a very wide U, okay, but like square, like a right-angled U, okay? So basically, and it's wide at the bottom. So imagine a bread standing and staying in place like that. It was incredibly fragile. And because of that, there's all these rules. What happens if the bread breaks? And that's why it was, if you remember, there were all these special secrets, that there were the people who knew how to make the incense, and there were people who knew, we had that in Shkalim and Yoma. Anyway, there were people who knew how to do this right. It's very complicated. So you really had to make sure it didn't break, because if it broke, okay, now it depends at what stage it breaks. Ad shelo pirkas. Remember, you put the bread on, it stays all week. There was a miracle that didn't get moldy, okay? Then, after the week, you would take them off. And then you would take the lavona, the frankincense bowls, and you would burn the lavona, and that would permit the bread. So what if it breaks at certain stages? Ad shelo pirkaf, you didn't yet take it off the table, the shulchan, nifras lachma, it breaks, halechem pasul, so no one can eat the bread. And and you don't burn the frankincense either. But if you already took it off the table, and you already took the frankincense off the table, and then the bread breaks, so alechem pasul, the kohanim can't eat it. However, maktir alavet b'zichin. So once it gets taken off the table, then already you can burn up the incense on the altar. V'amal Rabbi Eliezer. Here comes Rabbi Eliezer. That's who we're looking for. And we want to prove from this, mincha mi mincha lo yal. If he doesn't learn mincha from mincha, what does he say? Lo perka mamash, ela kevan shegiya zmana lefarek af al pi shelo perka, kemi sheperka damya. He actually says that if the time had come to remove it from the table, even if it wasn't removed from the table, that's enough to say that if the bread now breaks, okay, let's say, I don't know if there was seems like there was a time of day, or maybe it just means that day on Shabbat. Here, Rashi says actually, Shavru Sheshaot. That's what I was thinking, like midday, okay? Midday of Shabbat. If it breaks after that point, everything's still on the table. You can actually burn the bizichim, okay? You can burn the lavona, the frankincense, not the bowls, but what's in the bowls. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? Well, Amai, if you can learn mincha from mincha, then it should be learned from the mincha, a regular mincha offering, which you can't do this. So what's the mincha offering? What are we talking about? We're going to make a comparison. The bread breaking is like a mincha offering that some of the dough gets lost. Okay, some kid comes along and eats some of it, or some of it somehow spills on the floor. Or okay, now if it's missing, if some of the dough was removed before the kmitza, okay, now it's already the time for kmitza. Why wasn't the time for kmitza? Once it's in the bowl, you can do kmitza. So if you have a mincha that all of a sudden you lose some of the dough, what do we say? You can't do the kmitza. So how can we burn the bezichin, the lavona in these bowls? How can we take the lavona out and burn them? In a parallel case, the kmitza doesn't work, so why would the lavona work? So they say, so if you really learn davar mi davar, then you should be able to learn the frankincense from the mincha. So they say halokasha. No, those are two very different cases. Why? Well, think about it. Mincha lo bario kometz dida. I'm skipping a word because a bunch of places I'm going to skip words because many people take them out. It doesn't really make so much sense. Anyway, in the mincha, you haven't yet taken out the kometz. Okay, it's like when you have fruits and you haven't taken the truma yet from them, right? There's no truma in there. Okay, there's no kometz in there. You haven't called it a kometz yet. But ha-baril kometz dida. But in the bread with the bowls of frankincense, the frankincense is already separated. It's already designated as frankincense. So once the time comes for taking them off, we can say, oh, those frankincense are already ready to be burned. But if the kometz hasn't even been taken out, you can't say, oh, well, now that it's missing, we can take some out, right? Those two things are completely different. One, there is no kometz yet. The other, there's frankincense in a bowl already designated. So they're not comparable. So now they say, and therefore they continue and they say, okay, sorry, I just had to read this one last line. So when it comes to the bizichei levona, the frankincense is already separated, so when the time comes, we can say it can be burned. But now they say, okay, but I'll make a better comparison. You're saying it needs to be designated and separated out. So then why isn't it compared in this case? Once the kometz is taken out, there's another law, which is if once the kometz is taken out, but it's not yet burned, so now we're not standing in between the time when the whole dough is in the bowl and you haven't yet taken the kmitz out. That we said already, right? The kometz out. That we said can't compare. But what if we already took the kometz out and we're left with the remainder of the bowl, and now the kometz is supposed to go on the altar? Well, there's another halacha that says at that stage, when the kometz is already separated out, and then it really is compared to the bizichin, it's the same kind of thing. It should be like the shirayim. Now, the shirayim is the remainder that's still in that original bowl. Shechasru ben kmitza laktara. If you lose some of the shirayim between when you already did the kmitza, but you haven't yet burned it, de'em miktirim kometz alehem. You don't burn the kometz there. Now, that's completely parallel to the bizichei levona. So, well, now we're back to asking Rabbi Eliezer about that. If you learn davar midavar, you should learn one from the other, and either the bizichei levona shouldn't be burned, or the kometz should be burned, and why don't you compare them? So they say, lav pluktaninu, isn't that a machloket? Okay, they quote it as if, obviously he holds you can't do this. And the Gemara says, no, there's a machloket about that case. And Rabbi Eliezer must be, right, we don't know, but we're saying, Rabbi Eliezer, he does compare one to the other, and that's why he rules in that case that you would burn it, because it's just like the bizichei levona. So what we tried to do in this last section was try to say, first we said, why doesn't he have the same halacha for the blood and the griddle-cake? And then we said, that's because one's a mincha and one's blood, right? And when he does learn davar midavar, it's mincha from mincha, but not mincha from blood, right? Mincha from animal offering. But then we say, even mincha from mincha he doesn't learn, because look at this case with the bizichei levona. And then we said, no, that's a bad comparison. It's more comparable to this case, and you might think, oh, you can't do that either. But no. He actually must hold by the other side of that machloket and permit it, and because he does learn davar midavar. Okay, and thus ends that section for now. Although I did tell you we're going to come back at the very end to the first line here, or the line about the comparison of the mincha to the siluk bizichin in the very beginning. Okay, gufa. But now we're going in depth into something we mentioned before, which is at the beginning of this section of what we started today, we brought a machloka between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Chavitei Kohen Gadol." I'm going to read it right now. Inside where we are, Rabbi Yochanan are quoting it. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Eina Kedosha L'Chatzein. If you put the dough, right, the flour, the fine flour, in the vessel, it's not, and you only put half of it in, it's not going to be sanctified. Rabbi Eliezer Amar Mitoch Shekarva L'Chatzein Kedosha L'Chatzein, because it could be sacrificed in half, because it is sacrificed as half. Therefore, it's sanctified if you put half in the bowl, in the vessel. Amar Rabbi Acha, my time to Rabbi Yochanan. So the first thing Rabbi Acha does is he brings the reason for Rabbi Yochanan. And I mentioned this before. Amar Kra, mincha-style. It's half. So, what do they say? Notice the word mincha comes before the word half of it. So they say, have mincha, v'achar kach chatzeha. Bring the mincha, then split it in half. So that's what we learned. The whole thing has to be there, and then you can split it in half. Okay, now we're going to bring a difficulty on Rabbi Eliezer from a braita. Chavite meitive. Okay, that's a difficulty on a braita to Rabbi Eliezer, who said it could be split. This seems to support Rabbi Yochanan. Chavite Kohen Gadol lo hayu ba'ot chatzain. You wouldn't bring them halves. Ela mevi isaron shalem. You bring a full isaron. That's the amount of soul that you have to bring of the fine flour. V'chotzeu, and then you split it in half. That's braita number 1. Braita number 2, that also seems to contradict Rabbi Eliezer. V'tanya, and it says another braita. Ilu ne'amar, if it had said in the pasuk mincha-machatzit, a mincha half. Hayiti omer mevi chatzi isaron mi beito shacharit umakriv. Chatzi isaron mi beito arvit umakriv. I would have thought in the morning he brings half from his house and brings it. In the afternoon he brings another half from his house and brings it and sacrifices it. Talmud lomar, but that's why it doesn't say machatzit, half. It says machatzita baboker. Half of the mincha bring in the morning. That means that the mincha had to be all there in the first place. Mechza mishalem hu mevi. He brings half from something complete. So it must be you have to bring the whole complete thing and put it in the sanctified vessel. So how's Rabbi Eliezer going to explain these braitot? Very simply, lemitzvah. He's going to say that's the ideal way to do it, but it doesn't mean that if you did it that way, by splitting it, it's not going to be sanctified. Okay, ideally, bring the whole thing and put it in one vessel. But if you did it in halves, it went into a sanctified vessel. It's sanctified. And again, remember his theory. He says, since it's going to be sacrificed in halves, why would you need it? Why would it have to be done complete from the beginning? So, Amar la Rav Gavia mi beik til Rav Ashi. But now we're going to have another question on Rabbi Eliezer here. V'hach chukah ktiv ba. It's very nice to say it's lemitzvah. It's ideal, but you don't have to do it that way. But that doesn't work. Because it says in the psukim there, chukah. What does chukah mean? It's a rule that can't be broken. Remember, we've learned this. In the world of korbanot, if something says chukah, has to be done in that exact way. Which means you can't just say it's lemitzvah. If you're going to, it sounds like Rabbi Eliezer agrees in the end that you could read the psukim like Rabbi Yochanan. He just says that's the ideal, but you don't have to. And therefore, if you didn't do it that way, it's still sanctified. But if it says chukah, you can't say that. So he says, yes, what has to happen? You have to bring all the dough in the morning, all the flour, and do it all, right? But you don't have to put it all in the vessel. Those are two different things. From the Torah, machatzita means split it in half. So bring everything from your house, right? There's a stretch between, you might have thought, bring half in the morning and then bring half in the afternoon. That we don't do. Even Rabbi Eliezer agrees with that. But he doesn't think that you have to put it all in one sanctified vessel when you get to the temple. He just thinks you could have to bring it to the temple. You could put them each in two sanctified vessels, half in isaron, half in isaron. So that's how he explains it. Okay. So we started this section by bringing Rabbi Yochanan, showing his source, showing two difficulties from Braitot against Rabbi Eliezer. He explains himself. We still ask a follow-up question, and then we resolve. Now we're going to ask a question of Rabbi Yochanan. Umi amar Rabbi Yochanan hachi. Did Rabbi Yochanan really say this about the mincha-style, that it's not kedosha if you bring half? Well, ha'itmar. Now he talks about a different korban mincha. Now, korban mincha, a voluntary korban mincha that you bring, needs an isaron of solet. You need to bring, just like the Kohen Gadol, bring an isaron of solet. What if in a regular mincha, so this is not the Kohen Gadol, hifrish chatzi isaron v'dato lahosif. You brought half an isaron. You just didn't bring it all at once. You brought a half an isaron, and you're intending to, go back, get more solet, and bring it and fill it up eventually. Rav Amal eno kadosh. Rav says, well, the chatzi isaron is not sanctified because you have to bring the whole thing, and you didn't bring it enough. Rabbi Yochanan Amar kadosh. Okay, very surprising. There's this machloket, Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan says it's sanctified. Now, Rabbi Yochanan, by the minchat chavitin, said it's not sanctified if you put half. So why here, if you put half, is it sanctified? So vim ita, right? Again, this is exactly the way we asked against Rabbi Eliezer. How could you say what you said here? It doesn't match what you said somewhere else. And wouldn't you learn milta mi milta, davar mi davar? So same thing here. If that were the case, right? And if we're going to have a machloket about this, leilaf mi chavitin. Why wouldn't he learn it from chavitin? If chavitin, he said, can't be sanctified in halves, then this shouldn't either. Now, v'chi tema, again, we're going to start this section the way we started the daf. V'chi tema, if you want to say Rabbi Yochanan, milta mi milta lo yalif, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't learn one thing from another. Okay, it's not true. And we're going to bring something similar. Okay, we're going to learn another thing. What if you did something in the heichal? Is it good or not? We're going to learn one thing from another. It's a little bit different, this one. V'hamar Rabbi Yochanan, shlamim sheshachatan beheichal ksherim. Where are you supposed to slaughter shlamim? In the temple courtyard. Now, within the temple courtyard is this closed room that's a sanctuary, right? The heichal. So you're not really supposed to slaughter there. What if you slaughtered it in there? So he says, Right, so if you did it, they're kshirim. How do we know this? Because it says, ushchato petach ol moed. Supposed to do it in the opening to ol moed, which basically means in the courtyard. Shelo yehe tafel chamor meha'ikal. Now, if you could do it in the opening of ol moed, then obviously you could do it inside the heichal, because if something is kosher in the less sanctified area, of course it's going to be able to be done, right? If you can slaughter in the open space, for sure you can slaughter in the more sanctified space that's in the heichal. Okay, that's the tafel, is the less significant area. The azara can't be more stringent, that you can only do things there and you can't do them in the heichal. So we're learning, it's not exactly davar mi davar, but we're learning the heichal, right, from the azara, or what can be done in the azara can be done in the heichal. So he seems to make comparisons. And this one's a little bit different. So we're back to asking, well, then why wouldn't he learn from chavitin to this case? To which we're going to explain, why is this case different? Da'ato lahosif shane. This is different because he didn't, in the chavitin case, what happened? The Kohen Gadol put half in here and half in there. He was never planning to put it all into the one kli. But here, the person brings half in Yisrael and says, I'll come back, I'll bring more. So because they were intending to put it in, already what's in there now is already sanctified. And as he brings more, whatever he puts in will keep becoming sanctified until he gets to the full shiur. Here you see how important intent is. The intent was to put the whole thing in, so therefore it's already sanctified now. So it's a different case. Now we're going to see in a braita, someone who says this, Detanya mileim. Okay, this is from the pasuk, and we're going to get to this later, so I may as well read it inside now. In the Nisiim, if you remember, in the Chanukah Mishkan, the day they sanctified the Mishkan, all the Nisiim brought korbanot, right? They started bringing one after another. Korbanot karat kesef echad, so the korban of each nasi, it says, and it's in Parshat Naso, and you have every single, they all bring the same thing. And then it says, Mizrak echad kesef, shivim shekel b'shekel HaKodesh. There's a mizrak. They all brought a mizrak, which is a bowl. And they brought, Mizrak echad kesef, shivim shekel b'shekel HaKodesh. Shnehem mileim solet. So they actually bring these two. There's karat kesef echad and mizrak echad kesef. They're both mileim solet lula b'shem and mincha. So what do you see here? They're mileim solet. So what are they darshan from this mileim? They're full of solet, this fine flour. And mileim ela shleimim. So they say, what does mileim mean? They have to be full. Okay, that's where we learn that it has to be full to work. But Amar Rabbi Yossi, ematai, when does this work? It has to be full in order to sanctify. Bizman she'ein dato losif, if you're not planning to add anything. Aval bizman she'dato losif, but if you're actually planning to get to the full shiur, rishon kadosh. Every little bit you put in becomes sanctified as soon as it hits the bowl, and that's how we explain Rabbi Yochanan. Rav, okay, now we're going to ask a question on Rav. Rav says there, we hadn't really dealt with Rav. Rav just got brought up on the side. That's why everything keeps getting brought up. We got into Rabbi Yochanan because we're really focusing on Rabbi Eliezer, but he happens to disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, so now we get into the machloka between them. Now, on this issue, within Rabbi Yochanan, we were dealing with his opinion about the mincha chavitin. We brought some machloka he has with Rav about a regular mincha when you're planning to add, and a different case completely. But we brought it because it seemed to contradict. And wouldn't he learn one from the other? But now we're going to deal with Rav there. Rav says it's not sanctified, even if you're planning to add, okay? Till you complete it. So now we're going to say, Rav, now we have a question on Rav. The chavitin keman svirale. Who does he hold like in the chavitin case? In this case, he says it's not sanctified until you fill the whole thing up. What about in the chavitin? Maybe he'll agree with Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer says, well, there it can be eaten in half, right? It's broad as half, so maybe he'll agree there. Or maybe he agrees with Rabbi Yochanan. So let's see. So Ikar Rabbi Eliezer, they say, if he holds like Rabbi Eliezer, then leilaf min chavitin, then he would make the comparison and say, well, if in chavitin, even though they're different situations, but if in chavitin half can be sanctified, then maybe here he would say the same. If I said we could get to this 3 times today, well, maybe he wouldn't learn from chavitin because maybe he doesn't have this theory that, if it appears there, if it's there, if it's true there, it'll be true somewhere else. Maybe he doesn't do that kind of thing. And then each case its own, and maybe he holds like Rabbi Eliezer there, but would say here it's different. But no, he does learn one from the other. And from here, we're going to get into a new issue about Rav, a different machloket, which we're going to then get off on a tangent about. So we won't see the machloket yet, but we're going to see it very soon. Rav is going to say, mincha kedosha belo shemen, shekem matzinu belechem apanim. He's going to talk about a different issue, but what's he going to do? He's going to compare one thing to another. He's going to say, if you put a mincha you put the solet, the fine flour, in a vessel. It's already sanctified even though you haven't put the oil in. Even though it's a mincha offering that needs oil. Why? Because in lechem apanim, there is no oil, and therefore the solet's going to be sanctified before you put the oil in. So therefore, we're going to learn from the lechem apanim to a mincha that actually does require oil. But just by putting the solet, it's sanctified even though you haven't put the oil in, because there's some paradigm somewhere else where that works. And we're going to do the same thing with a lot of cases. Below levona, if you didn't put the frankincense in a mincha that needs frankincense, it's still sanctified. Shekematzinu b'minchat nesachim, because in a mincha that goes with sacrifices, you bring a mincha with it. There's no frankincense, so there you see it's sanctified without the frankincense. So therefore, even when it needs the frankincense, it can be sanctified without it. Below shemen and below levona, what if you didn't put shemen and you didn't put the frankincense in? You didn't put the oil, not the frankincense. Well, remember the minchat doesn't have oil, doesn't have frankincense. So again, if you have a korban that does need both, even if you didn't put it in the bowl, it's still sanctified because there's some paradigm. So what do you see? He does learn davar mi davar. Again, we weren't really concerned about the content here, although we will be momentarily. But the idea is he learns one thing from another. So then he would learn from the chavitin. If he had like Rabbi Eliezer and said it's sanctified in halves, then he would say the same thing by the regular mincha. And the fact that he learns davar mi davar proves he would do that. And therefore it must be he holds like Rabbi Yochanan there. Okay, al korchach, you have no choice but to say Rav to Rabbi Yochanan Sfirle. He must hold that the mincha chavitin can't be sanctified in halves, and he holds here it can't be sanctified in halves. Now it's a little bit weird because Rabbi Yochanan himself held that way by chavitin, didn't hold that way here. Why? Again, because Rabbi Yochanan said you were intending to fill it up. And Rav doesn't think that that's a factor. It doesn't matter. Right now you haven't filled it. You need it to be full in order to be sanctified. Okay, now we go gufa again. And now we're going to go into this machloket Rav has with, we're going to see Rabbi Hanina, about if you put something in the sanctified vessel without the other stuff that's supposed to go with it, is it sanctified or not? Rav says it is, because we have all these paradigms where it can be sanctified even without it. So even though in this case you actually need it, it's still going to be sanctified. So again, we're just going to read Rav again. Gufa amarav mincha kedosha below shemen shekematzinu b'lechem apanim. So mincha without the oil, that's we see in lechem apanim, there is no oil. So even if it needs oil, it's going to be sanctified even without it. Below levona, again, this means you put the amount of solet that you needed, you just didn't add the oil yet, or you didn't add the frankincense. You added the oil, but you didn't have frankincense. So again, shekematzinu b'minchat nesachim, where there it doesn't have frankincense. Below shemen, below levona, shekematzinu b'minchat chotei, the sinner's offering doesn't have shemen or levona. V'shemen ulevona, now there's a continuation that they didn't read us before. Shemen ulevona, what if you just put the oil in a vessel? Is that sanctified? What if you just put the frankincense in a vessel? Is that sanctified? Yes, because we have examples where all you put is oil and all you put is frankincense. Where are those examples? Well, this frankincense we talked about today. Well, kodshe high below high, v'high below high. They are each sanctified on their own. Shemen, shekematzinu belog shemen shel mitzorah. Remember the oil that goes with the leper's offering. You just put oil in a vessel and it's already sanctified. Remember, and then the Kohen takes it and sprinkles it and then puts it on the ear and the toe and the finger. Levona, frankincense, shekematzinu belevona haba b'zichin. In those bowls for the lechem apanim, it's just frankincense. So again, if you put those in the bowl by themselves in a sanctified vessel, it will become sanctified. Rabbi Hanina Amar, turning now to Amabet, he disagrees. He says, lo zo kedusha below zo, velo zo kedusha below zo. No, in all these things that we talked about, everything that you need for that mincha offering has to be in the bowl for it to be sanctified. You just have oil, you just have frankincense, you just have the solet, okay, or some combination without missing something. It's not going to be sanctified. Okay, so now we're going to ask about Rabbi Hanina. Ula Rabbi Hanina isaron lama nimshach. So now he asks a good question. This isaron measuring cup, they had all these vessels. Some vessels functioned as vessels to hold things, and some vessels were measuring cups. And measuring cups, even though you think of them as measuring cups, they poured the oil, the shemen hamishcha, on them. There was that special oil that anointed items in the temple and made them sanctified vessels. And they were anointed, the isaron, the measuring cups also. So they say, if it's never enough to have the flour by itself, you always have to have the oil in it to sanctify it, then and then presumably, right, the isaron, it's a measuring cup of an isaron. You fill it up, and then you pour it from there into the other vessel, which is going to have room for you to add the oil and the frankincense. Obviously, if you take a 1 cup measuring cup and you fill it to the top, and then you add other stuff to it, there's no room for it, right? So obviously, they would move it from there into the other vessel. So if anyway you're going to have to move it to the other vessel, then what was the point of sanctifying it? Lama nimshach. So they say le mincha-style, because the mincha-style didn't have anything else in it. It was just solet. Now here's a good question, and this comes up as a machloket somewhere, which is, didn't it have water? Okay, we don't talk about the water at all. What's a mincha, right? A mincha is a dough. You can't have dough with just loose flour. So there's actually a machloket about the mincha-style. When it has oil, so maybe it does, right? Now, there was water in the offering, but there's a big question about this mincha-style, which we called before a dry mincha. Did it have water in it and it's just called dry because it doesn't have oil? Or is it really completely dry and it didn't even have water in it? And then you have to think about how exactly they offered it. But there's a machloket about it. But anyway, not for our topic today. And then you have to think, did they put the oil, like was it sanctified even without the water? Right? Water never comes up in the Torah. It just talks about oil and frankincense. But it does, most people think that there was some water in there because otherwise you can't really make it into a dough. Right? It's like that classic. There obviously was water because it can't be there wasn't water, right? Okay, so log lama nimshach. So now they're asking the same question about the log. The log was the oil. Now you've said the oil can't be sanctified on its own. They said, no, the log shel mitzorah, because it needed to be, in the case of the log of the mitzorah, they just put it in that log measuring cup, and then they used it from there. Remember, the Kohen takes a handful into his hand from there. So for that, you needed it. Okay, now they're going to point out, back to this machloket Rav and Shmuel, Rav and Rabbi Hanina, they're going to say, Af Shmuel savar lahad Rav. Shmuel held like Rav, that it's sanctified even without the other stuff. Okay, how are we going to see this? Well, it's going to take us a little bit of time, but we're going to learn a sugya that we learned in Zvachim. I've been enjoying the beginning of Menachot. I don't know if you have, but just the repetition of sugya in Zvachim, it's number one, good review, and it's also just, it's less unfamiliar stuff for us because we've already learned it. So there's a Mishnah in Zvachim, Ditzna, right? Even if you don't remember it all, at least rings a bell. Klei halach mekachim et halach, umidot hayavesh mekachim et hayavesh. You have all these measuring implements. Some are liquid, some are solid measuring cups. The liquid ones only sanctified liquid items. The dry ones only sanctified dry items. Ve'en klei halach mekachim et hayavesh, v'lo midot hayavesh mekachim et halach. If you put a liquid measurement in the dry one, it doesn't sanctify it, or the reverse. Ve'amar Shmuel, but Shmuel modifies this. Lo shanu ela midot. That's only for measuring implements. Aval mizrakot, but bowls, which we use mostly for blood, liquid items, since they're not measuring cups, you didn't measure the blood in it, you just collected the blood in it. Mikachot et hayavesh. Okay, they also sanctify dry items if you put in the mizrak. How do we know this? From the pasuk we quoted before, Shenemar shnehem leim solet. There we're talking about the bowls. The bowls are full of solet, blula b'shem lemincha, and solet is dry. Okay, so what do you see here? Shmuel calls solet dry. Sounds like just the flour itself was sanctified in the vessel. But now, here there's a whole discussion about Shmuel that appears in Zvachim as well. Whether this is trying to say Shmuel doesn't necessarily really hold like Rav or not, it's not clear, but it does seem to go in that direction. It does sound like they're saying in the end, maybe it's not just the soul that's in there, because listen, Amalei, so we're going to have two things here. Amalei Rav Achami Difti Ravina, two approaches here. Mincha lechahi, that doesn't prove anything because the mincha is liquid, right? It's got oil mixed in it, right? It's a dough. It's not exactly a solid. Amalei, so how can, basically there's a question on Shmuel. How can Shmuel say from there that liquid bowls, right, bowls that are generally used for liquid can also sanctify dry items? This isn't dry. So Amalei lo nitzcha ela liyavesh sheba. So no, there's clumps in there, and the clumps that didn't get mixed in well are still dry, and they also become sanctified, so it does actually sanctify dry things. But you see here, it doesn't mean it was by itself, according to this. And Ibayit Ema, second answer to that question is mincha legabe dam ki yavesh damya. Well, it's true, it's not really dry, but what Shmuel is saying is it's dry, it's more thick compared to the blood. So we'll call that dry, and we can learn from there about dry ingredients as well, even though this isn't exactly dry. And once you have those explanations of Shmuel, it's not so clear he proves Rav. Okay, Gufa. Now, I told you toward the end of the daf, we're going to go back to the statement Rabbi Eliezer made in the very beginning. Again, his first statement was about the blood. You need the whole shiur. Then we questioned it from the minchat chavitin, where even if you put half, it's going to be sanctified. And then we said, well, maybe he doesn't learn davar mi davar, and you wouldn't compare these two. To which eventually we said, well, he does in the mincha, he just doesn't in the blood. Okay, but at the first stage, they say maybe he doesn't compare davar to davar, and then they said he does, because look, he compared the mincha that you did in the heichal, you took the komets, is kosher because you can learn it from the bezichin that happened in the heichal. The bezichin can be done in the heichal, also the mincha. That's the line we're going back to. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, so gufa, going in depth into this. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, mincha shekmatza beichal kshira, shekematzinu besiluk bezichin. So Mativ Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah questions this from a sugya we just saw, which is v'kamatz misham mimakom sheraglei hazarim dot. It says the coin's supposed to be kometz misham. What does it say in the pasuk? The owner brings the stuff to the dough from his house, right, to the sanctuary. He puts it in a bowl, and then it says v'kamatz misham, and the coin takes the kmitza from there. So what's from there? Where a zar can stand, because this person's still there who brings the mincha. So they say, how could you possibly say it could go in the eichal, in the sanctuary? A non-Kohen can't go into the sanctuary. It sounds like, the way we're reading this drasha, it has to be done in the place where the zar is standing, which means in the first 11 cubits into the room. After that, there's generally non-Kohanim don't go there. So, okay, now, since we're in this brighter, we're just going to quote a different drasha on it, which we also quoted before. Ben b'tera omel minayin shem kamatz b'smol. This is where we learned this sugya. Sheyachzir v'yikmotz b'yamin. If you messed it up and did it with the left hand, you could do it with your right hand. Tamalomar v'kamatz misham imakom shekamatz kfal. There, v'kamatz misham, from there, from the place where you already did the kmitza, you could do the kmitza a second time. That's where Ben b'tera learns his position. Okay, but that's not relevant to us. Now they're going to say ikad amri. Some people say hu motiv lav hu mafarik lav. Rabbi Yirmiyah brought the question. He answered the question. Ikad amre, okay, then in a minute we'll see his answer, but some people say, Amalei Rabbi Yaakov le Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa es baralach. Actually, Rabbi Yirmiyah's question was asked, but Rav Yaakov, said to Rabbi Yirmiyah, a different Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa, gave him an answer to the other Rabbi Yirmiyah's question. Okay, somebody answered this. Es baralach. Lo nitzracha ela lachshir et kol hazara kula. What was the point of that drasha? It's not that it has to be done in the first 11 cubits of the room where the zar can stand. It just means it can be done anywhere in the temple courtyard. There's no limitation. And why would you think there'd be a limitation to where it could be? So the first suggestion is, Shelo tomar ho'il va'olah kodesh kodeshim umincha kodesh kodeshim. You might say, look, the burnt offering is high-level sanctity, and so is the mincha offering high-level sanctity. So you might have thought, remember, kmitza is compared to shchita. So ma ola tunat zafon, the shchita, the slaughtering of the ola has to be done in the north. Ach mincha tunat zafon, maybe you would think the mincha has to be done in the north, which the Gemara says, no, you wouldn't have thought to learn from ola to mincha, even though they're both high-level sanctity, and this is a slew of things we're going to go over that we saw a number of times in Tzvachim. Malo ola shekain kalil. No, the ola has a certain stringency about it you wouldn't learn to anywhere else, because the whole thing is burnt, and the mincha, again, usually the remainder is given to the Kohanim. Okay, mechata. So fine, go with the sin offering. But also that is more stringent than the mincha, because malachatat shechem mechaper lachayvei kaitot, right? It atones for high-level sins. Mincha doesn't. Okay, me'asham, guilt offering, because it doesn't atone for such high-level sins. Malasham shekemine damim, but there's blood in there. That makes it higher level than this measly meal offering. Mikulunami, what if you took the three of them together and said, the least common denominator? Shekemine damim, but they're all blood. They're all animal offerings, which are definitely higher level, so you wouldn't have thought safon from there. Okay, so let's give a different explanation. Ela itzrich, you need it. Why? It says you have to bring it to the Kohen, you have to bring it to the Mizbeach, and it also says you have to do the kmitza. You might have thought mahagasha. Now the hagasha has to happen Bekeren Dromit Maravit, on the southwest corner. So you might have thought, Af Kmitza Nami, maybe it needs, so forget about Safon. You might have thought just like bringing it to the altar has to be brought to the southwest corner, maybe the Kmitza also has to happen on the southwest corner. Kamash Malan. Therefore, what it's coming to say is, Raglei Azarom Dok, it could be anywhere in the courtyard. It doesn't have to be, no, I just want you to think about it. The way they would do it is like this. They would put it in the bowl, then the Kohen would bring it to the altar, and then he would do the kmitza. So chances are he did it next to the altar in most normal cases, because he's already standing there and he's going to have to burn it on the altar. But if he wanted to, he theoretically could do it anywhere. And that's why that pasuk doesn't contradict the drasha that he could actually do it in the heichal. That comparison, the mincha that was done in the heichal, if he took the kmitza in the heichal, it's good because it doesn't have to be in a place where a zar can stand. It just can be. It can be anywhere in the temple courtyard. And then we'll say, oh, and including in the sanctuary. Okay, now we're going to do one last gufa, although we're not going to do it. I'm just going to show you that starting tomorrow, we're going to do a gufa into something Rabbi Yochanan said. Rabbi Yochanan said, Shamim sheshachatan be'echal kshirim. This was his comparison. You could do the shlamim in the heichal because, right, shneimar ushchato petach al mo'eh v'lo yetafel chamor min ha'ikal. Shouldn't have, right, the lighter can't be more strict than the more serious one. So if you can do the shlamim in the azara, you can obviously do them in the sanctuary. And then we're going to bring a difficulty to that. Okay, so right now we're just going to try to do a quick review. It's a little complicated because we went so long-winded and off and off and off. But we started with these two contradictory things about Rabbi Eliezer, that he said the blood versus the mincha, and we just distinguished blood and mincha. You can't learn one from the other, even though you can learn other things from each other. Then we got into Rabbi Yochanan's position where he disagreed about the mincha chavitin with Rabbi Eliezer, and we got into what's his source. We brought some sources that go against Rabbi Eliezer. How does he answer them? And then we said, wait, but Rabbi Yochanan doesn't do the same thing for a regular mincha. Why not? Wouldn't he learn one from the other? And don't say he doesn't learn one thing from the other, because he does. That's where we ended with that. Gufa was where he learned one thing from the other. And then we explained that there it's different because he was planning to fill it up. Now there, Rav disagreed about that other case we brought about a regular mincha, and then we brought Rav and we said, well, what would he say about the original machloket, the mincha chavitin one? Then we got into Rav, and then we got into there Rav's machloket with Rabbi Chanina about can you learn one from the other of the, where we said Rav also learns one thing from the other, and then we got off on the whole thing about if you don't have everything in the bowl, can it be sanctified? From there, we said, oh, Shmuel holds like Rav in there and that thing, and we tried to prove that. And then we ended with this gufa about Rabbi Eliezer, where we said, wait, but what about this drasha about makom shazar umdim? And then we said, no, that we explained differently. It just means it can be there, but it can also be inside. It could be anywhere in the temple courtyard. That's where we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day and chodesh tov.